We're doing it live. Hi, everybody. Sir Barry of Anglesey, East Kingdom, your hosty Mick Hostface for today's episode. Coach's Corner Roundtable discussion, Rattan and Rapier crossover. And I have with me three wonderful guests who know way more about this topic than I do. So let's start off by introducing right below me.
Hello. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yourself. Yes.
This is my name is Bumi. For those who don't know, I am both a member of the Order of Defense as well as the Order of the Chivalry here in Atlantia. And I was a mod first, and I crossed over after getting my mod into playing Armored, and I've done that for I've done fencing for 10, 11 years, and now I've done Armored for 4-ish years. And it's been a hell of a journey. I look forward to doing more of both.
All right, thanks a lot. And the next we've got this gentleman right here. There you go.
Hi, I'm Edmund. I'm a Mid-Realm Duke. I've been a knight for a little over 30 years. Started fighting about 38 ago. Started fencing about 6 or 7 years ago, and just this last weekend was inducted into the Order of Defense.
Yay! Congratulations.
Congratulations. And then we have Earl Lewis.
Hi, I'm Sir Louis out of the Mid-Realm. I've been fighting Armored for like 12 years, got knighted about 7 years ago, and have been doing some Rapier combat since I was an unbelt before I got knighted. And this past year and a half, I've been doing Rapier combat at pretty much every practice that I have people to fight with.
All right. And yeah, so let me just keep track. So we have Sir Bumi. We have Sir Bumi, who was, I guess all of you are Sir Masters and Master Sirs, right? There's no Master Masters here.
Yeah.
And then now we got Count Earl, Sir Master, and Master Sir Duke. But anyway, yes, we have Bumi, and you started off in fencing, and then you became a master first. I'm sorry, you became a mod first, and then you became a. Oh, I apologize. Louis not a mod. Louis fences though. But yes, you became a mod first, and then you got knighted after that. Whereas Duke Edmund started off as a knight, and then became a mod. And then we have Louis, who is a knight, and I guess. Maybe someday you'll be a mod. Hopefully, is that the goal?
I'll keep practicing, and if something happens, it happens.
Do you have other awards in the structure? AOA, GOA for Rapier?
None.
Oh, just kind of curious.
Under the radar.
Yeah, under the radar. Hey, you're the dark horse of every tournament. That's how that goes.
Yeah.
So, well, let's go with Bumi real quick. So maybe talk a little bit about how you started in Rapier, and then what got you to cross over into heavy fighting. I know when you and I first met, you were, as almost every Rapier I know that's armored, a very good spear fighter.
Yeah.
And that was probably the easiest transition. And then I know that you also fight sword and shield. And for those who don't know Bumi, if you found out that he was a mod and then he fought sword and shield and then saw him fight sword and shield, he's got very good range control and a very good point game.
I appreciate that. That's kind.
Yeah. So what was that like?
My particular journey going from Rapier to Shiv, which is a unique journey. My understanding is that I am the first in my kingdom and the third in known world to have made it in that period direction. There's a ton of crossovers, but usually it's from the Shiv side to the mod side. And for better or for worse, I chose to use the fundamental footwork that I already had in fencing to then cross over into playing with Rattan. I don't know if it's better or worse. I have friends who also cross over, like John Drake of Ansiora, who has chosen to fight a more traditional way of fighting Armored. I don't know that it is necessarily one or the other. It is just how my journey went. I know it definitely sped up the journey to knighthood because the results are there when your platform doesn't have to change very much. I just had to add in power, rotation, and then some of the mechanics of cuts.
Hey, Bumi, a quick question for you because I fight a lot of spear
Yeah.
and done a little bit of rapier fighting. And I always tell people when they say that rapier and spear is very similar, and I do agree that it's very similar. But one of the things for me is I think the biggest difference for me is the stance. There's a slight modification in the stance, and I think the difference is that I can't hold my hand in front of me because I've got this big shaft that's out behind me. So, was there any like real changeover you had to do? Like, was it a difficult thing, or do you find it to be exactly the same? Or you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, the transition happened really smoothly. I have honestly put in not that much work on spear. It has been very minimal in the course of, like, if you're looking at hours practiced, it is very, very minimal. The reason it translates so well, I think twofold. One, your primary hand, usually your right hand for sword fighting, for rapier, allows you to have really good understanding of line and control. And so it doesn't really change. A rapier and a spear are essentially the same function with different lengths. However, a spear you have to attach to your hip to have better efficacy. And then you have to hit a little bit harder with a spear, right? You're trying to go through the opponent a little bit more compared to rapier, where you're like an inch or two into the person. That's kind of the play difference, the social play difference.
Okay.
And I guess the for me, the hardest part was the attachment to my hip, like learning that mechanic, and then B, probably the hardest bit is using my left foot as the front foot for spear, right? As I'm normally used to using my right foot as my lead foot for rapier.
Okay, so are you right-handed?
I am right-handed, but I fight with my left foot forward with a spear, whereas I fight with my right foot forward for everything else.
Okay, and so your right hand is back with spear as well.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it was actually natural. And again, I've only done, well, I'll say this. I've done rapier twice, but my primary dueling form is two sword. And just full disclosure, I've been fighting spear since 1993. I've been fighting two sword for a handful of years. So I might start with my spear experience. So I fight left hand back with spear, and then I think because of the footwork, I'm much more comfortable thrusting with my right hand forward. So I actually don't switch stances. So I was curious if you kept your left. By the way, I should have known the answer to that because I try to memorize all the good spears I fight with frequently, and I couldn't remember which hand you had back. But now I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah. I honestly train both here. Like when I pel with spear, I usually pel with my left hand back because I want to be able to be more ambidextrous for functional spear fighting. Because sometimes you've got a tree or you're at a point in a line where it just makes sense on the other side.
See, it's interesting to me, Boomy, that you, when you started doing rattan, you went to the left foot forward for spear because because I had always done that, and when I started fencing, I went to the right foot forward for the spear to get that extra bit of range.
Yeah.
A little bit of extra measure.
I think my brain defaulted to wanting that hip rotation for the power specifically. I think some of it honestly came from watching. I have a I have a core memory in in one of the early times I fought spear, where I wasn't very good. I was just decimated by this person across the way, and I just looked at how they fought for a moment. I got killed. I stopped. I looked at what they were doing. It's like, I guess I'm going to copy that. That seemed to work really well for that person, and I think that was the moment I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this for a time being. I wasn't in context. I only fought spear for a couple of years before picking up sword and board at all, or any other form of armored combat. It was just spear for a couple of years, and it was very casual, as dabbling. And I only got the off, honestly, because I was Queen's champ, and at the time there was an expectation of like, hey, it'd be cool if you can join the spear squad on the armored side, support both sides of the kingdom. But that really that unlocked kind of the door, the pathway into becoming an armored fighter proper.
That's pretty awesome.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna throw in there that for myself, normally I fight right foot back, left foot forward, but sometimes I do change up now a little bit more than I used to. But spear, I will always fight left foot forward, and I found that trying to cross over to rapier, most of my fights start out that way. And with spear, I like to lunge with either I'll do lift the left foot and lunge further with the left foot, or I'll do like a step with the right foot, which how I do that with spear directly translates to how I tend to do that in a rapier fight.
Sure. Have you, Louis specifically, have you felt uncomfortable leaving your right foot forward for crossing into rapier? I mean, you've done it for a long time, so you might not feel comfortable in either direction, based on what you were saying earlier.
I think I find it fairly comfortable, but I have faster feet with my left foot forward, and I still try to keep my right shoulder forward with rapier, even though my foot's back and my hips turned a little bit back. So I try to square up my hips a little bit more, but it's more that most people don't anticipate me taking another step with my lead foot forward. Usually it's bringing the back foot forward to take a step.
The cross step, yeah.
Right. So I might take one step and then I'll go even with a further lunge with the same foot again.
Oh, that's dope.
Quick question here. I see this online. Actually, not the questions in our comment section here, but have you found the ability to switch back and forth between rapier and heavy helps when dealing with injuries and still wanting to fight? I think that's actually a really good question. I'm going to not answer that. I'll give you my own answer from a heavy perspective. But I know it. I turned 51 in a few months, and when I got knighted, I was what we would call like a weapons depth fighter. I've gotten better since then, but I was not really good enough in any one weapons form, but I was pretty good in several weapons forms. And I never planned to be a weapons depth fighter. It happened because I would fight with one weapons form until I would get injured, and then I would pick up a different weapons form that didn't hurt that particular injury. So yeah, for the crossover fighters here, is that something that any of you do where something's hurt for a while, so you do rapier, and then you've hurt your, I'm going to sound real dumb here, your rapier muscle. I don't know what rapier muscles are. But
You want to take this
you
one?
guys have like a trigger finger or something, or is it like a?
I think Edmund's got this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the poster child for this exact case.
Okay.
Because I've been fighting a long time, a little long in the tooth, and some body parts start to wear out, and I have found that I've been doing a lot more rapier than rattan over the last couple of years. So I initially picked up rapier during one of our recent reigns. To be just a royal points pinata, go out and be part of the community and, get the fence with everybody and hang out, and they all beat me up and have a good time. And we just enjoy the activity with everybody. And then someone local encouraged me to keep going. And I'm like, this is fun. I think I will keep doing this. And then, I started getting dinged up more often on the armored field. And I'm like, I need to keep rapier in the bag so that when, I can't do armored or can't do the pain of armored anymore, I can still go out and play with swords and come to the SCA and see all my friends and do all the stuff that I'm used to doing. So yeah, that's definitely a case where, getting banged up on the armored field encouraged me to fight more rapier.
I got a question here. This is my own question. Well, I guess let's take a war like Pennsic, or we can also talk about Gulf Wars or War of the Phoenix or any of the big wars that have both. The first one that came to mind specifically was with Pennsic, what is hotter, rapier or armored fighting? And then the follow-up question to that would be, what's the difference? What do you think is, I don't want to say easier versus harder, but like, what are the difference? Like one might have, like I know with rapier, you have to wear like a lot of extra clothes or whatever, but with armored, you have to carry more weight. So does anybody want to grab that one? Just like what are the differences there? Specifically, what's hotter?
Yeah, I didn't choose an easy path on that one. Right now for my cover, I wear a pretty heavy gambeson for rapier. So Pennsic was just hot.
The gear wise, I have found armored to be significantly hotter, and it is purely because of effort for having to lug around stuff. That's the main issue for me when I'm out in Penzik. It is, I cannot wait to strip down out of the armored stuff and go jump in the classic. As far as the rapier side, comparatively, it is literally taking off training weights. I get to run around way more. I feel faster, lighter, and it feels like less exertion in the activity.
Yeah,
Okay.
until recently, it was easier to mitigate your heat on the armored side because you could make a lighter garment to wear under your armor and make some holes, grommet holes or something that breathes a little better or, ventilate a little easier than your normal tourney fare. Whereas on the rapier side, until recently, you were stuck, head to toe, sealed up in fabric, and reasonably sturdy fabric at that, top to bottom. And the only real airflow you were getting was through the grill of your mask. Luckily, the rapier powers that be have accepted a reduced armor requirement. So now limbs don't have to be covered quite as heavily. And that gets a little more air in there.
It's huge.
But as somebody who has had heat problems, going to rapier. I've never gotten that hot. And in fact, my armor support garments are what I wear for rapier. I made my rapier outfit rapier legal, and then I point my armor to it.
Okay, thank you. Let's cut this. I got some audience questions here. So let's go to Louis first on this one. How do you balance rapier and rattan time to keep skills sharp enough to compete with the other shiv and mods? So that's an interesting one because like I said, I actually played. I've been to 2 rapier practices. That's the extent of my knowledge. I enjoyed it well enough. If the practice was a little closer to my house, I might have done it more often. But it's a commitment. It's this many days a week. Like you can't. It's hard to get good at something by just showing up occasionally. So every day you spend fighting heavy, you're not spot fighting rapier, and vice versa. So Lou, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. So what I've been doing is the beginning of practice, I spend my time in rapier. I don't get all of my armor on. I get some of it on my feet, my leg wraps, all that stuff. And when I'm injured, like last fall, I had tennis elbow pretty bad on my sword arm, and I switched more of my time to rapier. Maybe 2/3 of my time was focused on rapier, which I found gave me enough time to rest my elbow and give me a chance to heal up while still trying to work on stuff. And for me, the best part is that you're working on something more on the front end of the learning curve, something that you're not as used to and as familiar with. So there's a lot more learning to happen.
All right. Duke Edmund, you have any thoughts on that?
I always struggled balancing it. I'm lucky in the area that I'm in. We've got multiple fight practices a week, and I would generally do one of them as a rapier practice, and one of them as an armored practice. And then when I go to events, luckily the culture here, there's a lot of the rapier folks are used to getting going early. So I could get some fencing in before the armor's really kicking off. And then once, do whatever I can in the morning on the rapier side, and then go over to the armored side and play over there in the afternoon.
Before we go to Bumi, I was going to say that we tried once in the East to have a crossover melee practice. And the concept was that we would have no activities of one type going on without doing while the other one's going on, meaning that we would alternate so that if somebody wanted to do both, they could do both. And I remember one of our crossover fighters had sort of realized that it was kind of an impossible task. Now, part of it was the summertime and the heat just wears on you. And I've always said this, that the armor goes on once and it comes off once. It's very hard to get somebody to put the armor on a second time unless they've designed their kit around that. So I do think that's one of the challenges with armored and rapier crossover fighting. But yeah, Bumi, if you want to follow up on that question, how you balance your time, if you want to add anything more to that.
Oh, I I mostly fight armored in generally for melees because I think it is very fun and dynamic. But for tournaments, it is just dependent on the tournament, which one seems more appealing, whether I'm fighting on the armored or the rapier side.
Do you gear up for it? Like, do you see like a tournament's going to be in X number of weeks, and so you decide you're going to focus like all your practice time on that style?
I don't practice that much rapier at this point in my current life, and some of that is I believe I have kind of gotten to a point where I don't need too much to regain that last little bit of sharpness.
Right. No
and
pun
so my
intended.
focus is like grinding. There's a lot more like ceiling to be climbed on the armored side. So when I'm training here, it's usually on the armored side.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's understandable because, like you said, you've been doing rapier for a really long time. And again, I don't do crossover fighting, but I have the same thing. Like, I'm focused on my two sword heavy fighting, and every practice I get, I feel like I jump up a level. Whereas my melee spear, I don't think I'm getting any better. It's just a matter of I go out there, like I said, but maybe before war, I'll do like a couple of exercises. Last practice we had, I exhausted myself, realized how out of shape I am in. So now I sort of focus on some of that stuff. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Let's see, we got some ideas here. Let me focus on. Sorry, I got two mouses here, two different computers. Combat techniques. Bumi, you had some thoughts earlier on. Like how you can take something you've learned from one activity and apply it to the other. And then
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. This last crown that I fought, there were a number of times that like I would fight a 2-stick person and I would feign a thrust. I just pump a little bit. Folks who know me respect it and they defend themselves in some manner. And if what they do is they have their 2 sticks and like, oh, they're thrusting toward my face. Let me kind of cross block it in this manner. What happens is my brain's like, well, I'm going to just disengage that next time. So I feign the thrust, they cross block and that continue through and hit them in the face. And that's what happened in that particular interaction. And so there are some skills that are very directly transferable, whereas others work in opposition. I think that there are some movements, like I'm very forward back focused with minimal lateral movement in fencing, which is not good in armored. In armored, I need a lot more lateral movement to get the angle that I need to get on, to throw that low shot to the hamstring, to find the angle on that high offside, whatever it is. I have found that there are times where the way I practice one does not translate, and it is, if anything, a deterrent to the other side. So it depends on the action.
Yeah, and I think when we were at Adult Swim, you and I talked about this a little bit about something I had to do. Actually, I was a very similar fighter to you in heavy singles, not because I came from a rapier background, but because. So, by the way, you guys can't tell in the pictures here. I'm 6'3" and Bumi's like 6'6". We're very tall, rangy, lanky people. So
Edmund's got me beat by a bit.
What's that?
I'm only 5'19".
Right.
So, but with that, that makes us very much like we want to be C-range fighters. So anyone that's listening doesn't know the range. Our range system is usually A is like belly to belly in someone's face. C is pretty much stabbing range. B is kind of in between. And then we have what we call D range, which means you're sort of disengaged. And that varies from person to person. So a tall person can be in C while the shorter person could be in D. And so I know for myself, particularly when I was younger and much faster on my feet, I pretty much fought everything in C. And then I had to kind of learn some sort of B and A range stuff. And Bumi and I were talking about that because especially as a tall rapier fighter wanting to really fight that C range game and then finding out that some people know how to shut that down and then having to kind of learn other aspects of that. Edmund, you were sort of nodding your head earlier about something. What you want to interject?
Talking about, I forgot what Bumi was saying.
You're talking about the crossover actions where the actions translate from one to another.
Yeah. I mean, the big the big things for me that I found crossed over were, I don't remember what I was shaking my head about. Were being able to read a fight, being able to read a fighter and anticipate what their body movements are going to be. That is one of the things that I was able to bring over that was really beneficial to me, figuring things out. But what I was nodding my head about was when Bumi said that there are certain things that are in opposition, and that was the big thing for me, because in Rapier, taking all of the large, gross, powerful movements from Rattan and turning them to very fine, small, light movements in Rapier was a big challenge, especially as I'm a big guy. I'm not exactly agile.
On that, I want to share a quick story, and I hope this applies. So I've been doing rattan fighting for a while, and years ago, my friend wanted me to go try out his karate dojo, and I ended up fighting one of their black belts there. If we'd been doing karate, the guy would have beat the crap out of me. But we were doing weapons, and we were doing saber fighting, and I was actually pretty decent with a saber, with a two-handed, I guess it was like a katana. These were foam weapons. And they're fighting as if they're actual like blades. Like you got a really sharp sword, you're going to sort of slice on somebody. So they had these very quick movements because you don't have to hit an unarmored person, all that hard with a sharp sword. And I was doing my SCA movements. Like I was really getting my hips into them and swinging really hard. And we went about 50-50, and he was trying to give me some advice on how to sort of quicken those things up. And then we went back to the changing room and we took our gis off, and he was covered in welts because I just been hitting him so hard the whole time. So that was one of the things I can imagine, going from rattan to rapier, and not just from a technique standpoint of it, but also a safety standpoint. I know in my two sword, I've really been working on my body thrust lately, and I'm trying to throw those things as hard as I possibly can to try to get people to really acknowledge the shot. Not to hurt people. I mean, I wouldn't do that against somebody that's maybe a lower level fighter or armored down. But I imagine there has to be some sort of, I don't know, like a mind switch or something, where you go from, I'm really trying to generate a lot of power in my hips, to maybe some sort of quicker technique with the touch that's safer. Anybody have a thought on that?
Well, so when I originally authorized in fencing a little over 20 years ago, during our third reign, so I could fight everybody in our Rapier championship. And I decided after doing that it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing with my time. And I had hit somebody pretty hard, and they missed a couple of days of work, and I felt really bad about it. Ooh. So I'm like, I pulled my own authorization and put the stuff away and didn't do it for a long time. And so when I came back, the number one goal for me was to be able to participate in the activity without hurting people, without hitting hard. And luckily, I have a couple of friends who've, funnily enough, were the guys who originally taught me how to fight armored, are now MODs themselves, and they're very into historic fencing. And it has some solutions for not hitting those really excessive shots. If you use those techniques, it makes you less prone to those overly powered shots. And so, I was able to mitigate that, with intent. I wanted to make sure that wasn't happening, and then finding the right technique to use to make sure that it wouldn't.
Okay. Hey, for both you and Louis, who started off as rapier or as heavy fighters, was it a challenge at all to maybe your egos to go from, Count Louis or Duke Edmund, the rattan, superheroes, to being just another newbie rapier fighter? Louis, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, from my side, like I said, I don't even have a AOA level rapier or anything, but I'm enjoying not having any of that focus and just playing it at practice. We've got a good number of mods here and a lot of other rapier fighters, and our Sunday practice is pretty big. So I just get good fights and have a lot of fun with it.
All right, awesome.
But so one thing that I found translated well is my footwork. Even though Ron Walder keeps calling me out on not using my lateral footwork as much, I just get pulled into doing the front back stuff. And it's a little bit different when I introduce that because most people aren't expecting too much horizontal movement. And I did find it was difficult on blocking when I first started, that I would always try to do bigger blocks. And the blocks end up being more small and, little circles, or just changing angles. And it's quite different. And so I found that progression changing.
Do you think it's fair to say that the strategy carries over more than the technique between the two different forms?
Strategy.
So I guess when we say technique, we're sort of talking about like you said, like the big blocks versus the small blocks, and the different way. Now we're stabbing more, and we're doing. These.
I don't think the strategy necessarily carries over because you're fighting a very different system, but the understanding of how to manipulate your opponent, how to lie, how to set things up. I mean, those thought patterns translate.
Okay.
It in a good, the range that you are comfortable with in an armored fight and the range you're comfortable with in a rapier fight are completely different. And a tendency to want to be in one range for one, I also found that hard to translate. I could move quick. I could read what intentions were pretty quick. I could respond fast, but definitely that range where I am comfortable, a lot of people will give me feedback like, "Hey, you're in the zone." If your foot's this far forward or whatever, like you're in the striking zone. So that really forces seems to me like a faster paced fight.
One of the interesting points that like hearing people talk about it is like some of it is just terminology, right? Strategy versus technique. Like technique tends to like presume the specific action and what does and doesn't cross. Strategy can be a little bit more nuanced in that it could be like the specific weapons forms and what it allows versus the larger weapons forms. But in my head, I suppose they're framed as like principles or like fighting principles and or like metas. To give some context, I also have my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and have been teaching there as well.
So you're very used to A range then, right?
I'm very, very comfortable closing my eyes and feeling another human body and how to move it in advantage for me ways. So I say all this because I think there are principles in fighting, such as, and all of you understand this. Like, for instance, if I want a reaction out of you, I'm not going to bully generally my way into that action and reaction. I'm going to give you something else. Like if I throw high, disengage your dagger low, or in armored, if I want your shield to not cover your temple, then I maybe give a false bit of information towards your belly. Then I mull in a high to that temple. All of those things in grappling, in wrestling, and they're all those principles. I think makes somebody a good fighter is how I would describe it. The difference between a fighter and someone who like a person who does rapier or does armor, the specific sport almost doesn't matter. A fighting mentality, I think, incorporates those principles, and a high-level fighter of any discipline, I think, has the capacity to articulate those principles and how they can apply those in many different applications, I suppose.
I would think, I'm just guessing here. I would think that that would apply for a lot of fighters. I've seen you fight Bumi. I don't know if I've seen Duke Edmund fight, and I fought Louis before, and that all makes sense. But then I've also fought big brawler, bruiser, cave troll kind of fighters. And I would guess for them, they would have to learn, maybe more finesse and more range control than they're used to. Take someone like, and I just said the word cave troll, so I hope he doesn't get offended, but someone like Duke Timothy. Although actually Duke Timothy, my understanding, we were just talking about this, that his buckler fighting, he takes a lot of the stuff from sort of the Rapier school, like Rapier and buckler. I think he's doing that. But he's not running in and sort of, pressing, one person's sword off with a hand and coming in. And I mean, I don't think, can you do that with Rapier? That's not a thing, is it? Is it?
You can. Depends on what weapon they have.
Okay.
This past Gulf War, I jumped down Brendan, who knocked me on a diamond tournament. This is currently Queen's champ Brendan of Anstiora. Fantastic fighter, buckler sword. I think one of the best buckler sword fighters that I've ever run into. And they beat me in the diamond tournament because I honestly just gave them time to work, and so we at range, and we both kind of fought at sea, which they're very comfortable with. And so when we hit the Gulf Rose, I just hard bound sword to sword. The moment I got contact, shoved that thing in the ground with mine as well, and just jumped at him with a dagger and just did not let up. And that now created a new problem for him, which is, this guy's willing to jump down my shorts. It makes his willingness to be aggressive at sea a lot less viable.
Okay.
You can jump down someone's shorts. It sounds fun, regardless of weapons.
Dude, again, man, I'll throw this one out to you. For anyone that maybe they're thinking about crossing over, what are the differences in the target areas, and how does that affect strategy?
So target areas for Rapier is pretty much everything. And on the armored side, that's when the target areas get shrunk down. So inch above the wrist and up, inch above the knee and up are all are legal targets. So we don't throw it at knees or lower extremities. We don't throw it hands. And I think that goes back to, back in the day, we didn't have good armor and people had to go to work. You can thrust to the face. You can't thrust to the head. Everywhere else is legal for a thrust or a cut. In Rapier, you can stab anybody anywhere.
Okay.
And then same with draw cuts, push cuts, tip cuts can go anywhere.
Okay. It's funny. We had an event here once, and we were sharing the same field. It was the heavy fighters were sharing the same field with the Rapier fighters. I don't think we had any combat archery that day. And I was very concerned about safety. So I got a rope out and I drew a line down the field. And that way the Rapier fighters would not cross the line into the armored area. And the armored fighters would not cross the line in the Rapier area. And I said to one of the Rapier fighters, who actually was a former armored fighter, and I said, I did this because I didn't want to have the armored fighters. I forget how I phrased it, but I didn't want them to run into the Rapier fighters and hurt them with these sticks swinging around. And he said, yeah. He's like, you might get stabbed in the face and poke your eye out. And I never really considered that possibility because the Rapier fighters aren't wearing any armor, but those little things can sort of slide right through a bar drill.
Well, and that's one of the things coming from the rattan world to the steel world is, back in the day, it was always, the armor is the big, tough, burly guys, and you fence because you won't get hurt, and it doesn't hurt as much, and it's safer. And I'm here to tell you that we're using real steel swords on the Rapier side of the world, and if you don't exercise caution, they can be dangerous. And I have been bled by Rapiers more than by rattan swords. And not because of anything even heinous or excessive, just, an oops, weird, skiddy shot. I put my arm in the way when I shouldn't have, just silly stuff. But, an SCA Rapier is probably about as sharp as a 12th century sword, which is the standard that we use for all of our armor standards and weapon standards. So, if you think you're just going to come over here and arrow flint it, and you're going to be fine and everybody's safe, that's not the case. It takes real care and control for your opponent to make sure that everybody stays safe.
I had a question here. Hold on. What about, can you all talk about the conditioning? Maybe what kinds of differences in conditioning have you adapting training routines to develop necessary skills and conditioning for each sport? So do you find them to be similar, differences? What do you need to do to condition more for one or the other? Louis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in on that. What we like over COVID, we did a lot of focus on footwork. Myself and Sadb and Brannis, and
I saw the videos.
And coming out of that, we had someone join us that was one of the younger guys, and he was a collegiate or is a collegiate fencer. And we had more of the Rapier fighters joining us to do ladder drills, every practice, and at least doing and spending a lot of time with that. I found it helped build a little more control and balance, trying to keep your center upright and over top of your feet so that you can control your position. I do find in rapier fighting that it's a lot more sensitive to that. Whereas in armored, you can take bigger steps and you can be off balance and recover. But it's the movements are a lot smaller in rapier, and being off balance almost forces your feet to go different ways that you don't want to when you lose control.
Okay. Edmund, thoughts on that?
So I don't have conditioning. I've never been into conditioning. It's never been something that I've done. But I've got fighting efficiency. So I've adapted my fighting to, I can fight all day. You ask me to go run a mile, I'll die. And part of that is, because it's what I've always done for my physical activity. And also, Louis mentioned balance. I'm tall and gangly. And if I do anything, I can't do explosive things. When I do explosive things, my balance goes bad. When my balance goes bad, I lose. So I tend to very much control my feet. I don't do anything too big with my feet, so that I've got absolute control over where my balance is at all times. So that's just the nature of the way I've done it.
Okay. And to give the audience a little bit of background, so Duke Edmund just says he's not a conditioning guy. Louis was a collegiate track star. And we got Bumi here is you're Mr. Conditioning. You're are you a physical therapist? I know you do I do. I want to plug your channel, by the way. I know I've been seeing your Facebook reels come up in my feed.
Yeah, I so a little bit of background for both of the folks here in the call as well as out there watching. Part of my day-to-day profession is I do training. Back here behind me is the battle barn is what I call it, but I built a roughly 1,200 square foot gym for myself and clients. This is also where I host armored and fencing and such for the local area. But the context is I primarily help people with mobility issues. That's my focus in work, and specifically I have two main categories: either people who have gone through an injury, gone to PT. And then when PT runs out, they need something to continue, because if you don't keep using it and practicing it, you lose that progress that you've made. Or I have other folks who have pain where they're like, oh man, my shoulder hurts, my knees hurts, my hip hurts. And they come in and I try to help people regain what they've lost. This kind of ties into your prior question of the ability to stop one in order to rest for something else. I don't tend to overdo anything, because I understand that the key component for me to continue to do this, to have longevity in all of these combat sports, is to really focus on my balance and my flexibility, right? My ability to have strength at the end ranges of my motion. And so what I do is I take things like any device to off balance you. And if I want to work on fencing, one of the best things you do is a split squat, right? You're in a lunge and you just lower toward that front foot and come back up, but do it in an off-balance way. Find something that destabilizes that front foot, a Bosu ball, a balance pad, which is this black pad right here in this camera, and choose to put yourself in harder conditions, then you will fight it. That is always my belief. The boxers train 24 rounds for a 12-round bout. That's the same concept. Off balance yourself, make yourself fall in a controlled manner so that you don't on the field. For armored fighters, one of the biggest things: external rotation, internal rotation, overhead extension for that shoulder. People fuck up their shoulder a lot in armored, a lot. Shoulder and elbow. Those are like the two most common injuries. I see it all the time. Friends who've been, I've been doing armor for a long time. Now my offsides hurt my elbow. Now my offsides hurt my shoulder, or they get a shoulder impingement. And so much of that is the asymmetry in your muscular structure. And for me, it's my job is to diagnose, okay, in your particular case, what's the asymmetry? What can we strengthen? What can we loosen? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all those things. I bet everybody in this call has been given or tried tools to help them continue to be able to do the sport that we want, because our bodies at points don't allow us to. And so that's what I focus on. So conditioning wise, I spend a lot of time working on mobility, flexibility, fascial release, those sorts of things, rather than the actual skill only. I think it's honestly things like, as much as people love pelling, I think it can be overdone. I think that sometimes that's not the correct action. Sometimes you need to work on regaining your motion in your squat and making sure your knees aren't hurting because your quads and your hamstrings are too tight.
Yeah. Yeah, I got one for Edmund. Do you see a difference in communities and cultures between the heavy fighting community and the rapier fighting community? I know there's a knight in my area that does a little bit of both, and he did notice differences in cultures, and not in a negative way or anything for either side, but just sort of where one particular group kind of focuses in one area and another group kind of has maybe a different kind of focus. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's some cultural differences. And I've been going through discussions. We have an event out here in the Mid-Rome called Tournament of Chivalry, which is a big, basically the unbelts come and beat up on the knights to either learn something or to get noticed. And being that what we do, we took it and we made a tournament of defense and a tournament of archery and a tournament of arts and sciences. We copied the platform and kind of stamped it on everything else. Well, tournament of defense doesn't work the same way because the motivations are very different. And in the armored world, I think people have a little better connection to what they're trying to recreate. The knights from the movies that we see, or the knights from history that we've heard about. The romantic idealized version. And folks tend to be a little more focused and a little more competitive. Whereas on the rapier side of the world, people are more interested in the activity and more interested in the scholarship side of it, like figuring out how to do it, pulling apart the manuals. Not necessarily, I don't need to win, but if I do it like it looked in the book, that's cool. I did what I wanted. So there's not quite the same competitive drive. Not to say that there aren't. I mean, there's plenty of competitive fencers, just like there are plenty of fighters who are just out there to have a good time. But just in terms of the percentages, it's a little bit different. I mean, that's a real big difference I see.
Hey, you touched on something. I'm curious. I've always said, and I might even be wrong on this. I probably should know more than I do. That in Rattan fighting, we're not really recreating medieval combat. We're creating medieval combat practice. And so I wondered with the rapier fighting. I know almost nothing about the rapier, historical rapier fighting, but is what you guys doing pretty close to identical to it? Like, did they have blunted rapiers that they would practice with against each other? I'm assuming they would.
Oh, sure. So there's lots of schools of thought within the rapier community. Just like you get three people together, you get four opinions. But there's a school of rapier that developed out of the epee days. Then we went to Schlagers. That's kind of the SCA style. And then there's a multitude of different manuals that people are studying out of, trying to use that to build their skills. So there's a lot. There's SCA history, and then there's medieval and Renaissance history that people are leaning on for their rapier techniques.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. One of my friends, again, who crossed over from, he's not really, I wouldn't call him a crossover fighter. He's more of a retired armored fighter who went to Rapier. He just, the injuries he couldn't keep up with anymore. So he made a sort of a hard cut, sold all of his armor, bought all the Rapier equipment, been doing it for, actually his name's Tally. He's a SCA Tally, if you've ever seen his video channel.
Yeah.
He's got a ton of videos out there. And he was telling me one of the things he found fascinating about the Rapier fighting was that it is historically based, that you have, like a lot of us are kind of making up names for our rattan maneuvers. Well, I mean, we shouldn't say we're making it up. Someone came up with the term, and then 30, 40 years later, we're still calling it a flat snap, and maybe in 100 years, we'll be calling it a flat snap. But still, it's sort of coming from within the community a lot versus the Rapier. There's a really rich history where I guess all that stuff has been figured out. So there's a lot of manuals. So I guess with that, I have a question. So how much of it is historically based? And I don't mean like maybe where HEMA, where like the goal is to be historically based, but how much of the techniques are based in history? And is there really anything that the SCA has sort of brought to the game that wasn't already sort of represented in the manuals? To whoever wants to grab that one.
So the one thing that if you're studying the manuals and you're playing from the manuals, the first thing you have to know and remember is that they were teaching you how to kill someone. And we don't want to do that here. So, yes, the manual says you run your sword through to your hilt and you keep going. Well, we don't want to do that because that hurts. So we do have some contrivances within our game to make sure that we're being safe. But with a little bit of tweaking, pretty much most of what I've seen from the manuals is applicable, at least in the stuff that I've been studying. Because I use an Italian master, Salvatore Fabris, or Fabriz, as it was announced in court Saturday. That's who I've studied. But some moves you don't want to do, but by and large, what worked for them works for us. And, they spent a lot of time figuring this stuff out. And these guys were professionals, at learning and studying this stuff. The guy who taught me, Sir Logos, is one of his quotes is, thousands of guys died figuring this stuff out. Show it some respect, because they figured this out. They did all the FAFO for us. Just follow the guidebook.
That's pretty fascinating. Do you think there's and again, I'm probably dating myself or ourselves, depending on who I'm talking about here. The movie The Duelist with Harvey Keitel. I love that movie. It's really good. It's like French Napoleonic era. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know the movie, it's basically it's a whole series of duels. It's like it goes over like something like 20 or 30 years, two people who needed to settle a dispute with a duel, and for whatever reason it just never got settled. One rule says like if you bleed or something like that, then the duel, or if you get injured, you can't complete the duel. And they did a whole bunch of different versions of dueling. If I remember in that movie, there was there's one, I think it was the very beginning of the movie, there was a duel going on, and Harvey Keitel was standing there with the arm out sort of extended while standing very tall. And the one rapier practice I went to, someone talked about that style, and I was like, oh, I saw that in the movie. I know that one. And again, I'm the idiot on this in this discussion here. I'm the person who comes in and is learning everything from our panelists. I remember that one, and then there's the crazy one where like you lean way forward and put your face forward and your
Yeah,
defense is kind of out in
everything.
front of you.
That's
What's that?
That's fabulous. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
And then in the duelists, they also had one where they did a duel, which I guess we don't do in the SCA, which is when you're riding on a horse toward each other and you
Right.
take a shot.
Yeah, they did their rapier duel, then they had their saber duel on horseback, and then later on they had their small sword duel, which small swords are dangerous.
What's the length of a small sword?
They're maybe 36 inches.
Okay.
They're very light, and you can be dead and not know it.
Oh wow.
Because they'll go right through you, and you're gonna keep going like you think you're fine, and then you're not.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, the movie, I think they only did the pistol duels at the very end, right?
I think that's correct.
Yeah. And again, not that I would recommend anyone to go watch it, although I enjoyed it. It was a good historical piece. But the very end of the movie, it wasn't just dueling. It wasn't dueling like you saw in Highlander. They did saber. That's the thing. Highlander, they did the saber duelings, and they kept stabbing Connor McLeod, and he wouldn't die. But no, this one was instead of like the paces turn around and shoot, it was like they were on a big property and they had to go off in different directions and then find each other and kind of get the jump on somebody and shoot. But I think they had like 2 pistols with 1 shot each. So the one guy had run out of his shots, and that was the end of the duel. Let's see. Hey, what would it be like if you start in one activity? So whether it's rapier and armored, and you decide to start the other activity, particularly if you're already, say, a grant level or a peer level fighter, and now you've got to kind of go into this whole new activity. I think Edmund, was this yours that you brought up? On our chat here, I think starting and entering with humility and being a beginner and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, so I went into rapier, as a duke and a knight for a long time, and it's really easy when you're a master sword fighter and you go into another sword fighting activity thinking that you know everything. And I went in just, hey, I want to play with this, teach me. And not going in with any preconceived notions, not going in expecting to translate what you do, or I know what I'm doing, let's just fight. Go in, and if you're going to take it up, go in with that proverbial empty cup. Hey, I've been doing this other sword thing for a while. Can you show me how to do this sort of thing because it looks cool? And then just learn it. Don't try to let your ego take over. Just be a student again and just learn it. Find a good teacher. Find someone that can help you. Some of the stuff will help, but some of the stuff, as we talked about earlier, will be a hindrance. And just learn it with an open mind.
Yeah, I would think that could be a little bit of a challenge. So this would go to any peer, really, any peer in the SCA, or anyone that's even if they're not a peer, if they've achieved any sort of level of proficiency or mastery in an area where you've learned how to master something, but then when you go into the new activity, your skill set is not really there, and so you have to have this sort of. Yeah, I would think that'd be something very difficult to navigate between, you don't know the new subject, but you know how to master something. So you're sort of at the level of people that haven't quite figured out how to master something yet. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. When I was champion, I would do this is when I was an unbelt, I would do all the rapier war fighting. But when I came back getting ready to for our events last year when we were reining, and I was practicing getting back into the rapier side with our local fighters, I would get into stances that I'm comfortable and familiar with, and that would be very threatening, I would say, onto the rapier fighters as to like, what's he going to do? Because he looks like he's going to swing his hand down and, chop at me or something like that. And so just basically getting back into it was a challenge, and having people be comfortable around me and getting familiar with me, and me getting familiar with what style and how to project intentions, and I found that all very interesting. And even though I would have very good control, very good range control, very good control on how far I was pushing the tip to, just touch, but the appearance of not looking like I know what I'm doing, because I'm sort of out of context of what I'm more familiar with, and trying to adapt to the rules and trying to play it the right way, but still looking like I don't know what I'm doing at all.
I watch videos of myself when I'm trying a new weapons form, and every now and then I have to go back and watch a video of myself of a weapons form that I've been doing for a long time, just to remind myself that I'm actually not terrible at everything. So I can imagine that can be a bit of a frustration. Question about the mindset and strategy between the two. We talked a little bit about strategy before, but do you guys see any relationship or differences between sort of approaches, tactical strategies, maybe how you warm up, get yourself ready for tournament? Is there any sort of big differences there, or is this all the same?
You're talking about like how one prepares for a tournament?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. It could be, how do you prepare for a specific opponent? How do you prepare for the whole tournament?
I think that's being a fighter, and that's very similar.
Yeah,
that's a skill that crosses over. Could I, Barry? Could I add to the last thing? I'm kind of curious. This is for Louis, Edmund, for both of you. Did you guys feel like it was more challenging to kind of cross over, or like, because for myself, I felt like it was a very a proverbial breath of fresh air, because all of a sudden I shed a lot of expectation. If I step on the Rapier field, there's a lot of expectation. Oh yeah, Bumi's here. I think he's going to win the thing. Whereas like when I first picked up Armored, it was like, oh, they expect me to be bad, and that was great. I love that. I wanted those really low expectations, and then the gains that you make are very rapid, right? You go to one practice, and all of a sudden you learn a bunch of stuff, and you're way better than the next practice. Whereas refining an A to an A+ is a pain in the ass, and it takes forever.
Yeah, the understanding and knowing that when you're going to learn something, that you start from nothing and you're going to get better if you keep practicing and keep putting time and attention to it. And going into it with that mindset that everything is going to be learning, for me is what helped. That helps a lot. And like you said, the low expectations helps a lot, where you go in, you can just play and not really have to try to game up to perform well or whatever. I really haven't been, for me, it's all been practice and melee, and there's been no tournaments really. I haven't had any of that focus yet.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I came in, without a lot of expectations. I just wanted to play, and have a good time and play with swords with different friends and learn something new. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I really started being serious about it.
Yeah.
Because I split my time, and I'll fence this activity, and I'll do rattan that activity, and I'll fight this week, I'll do armored this week, I'll do rapier next week. It wasn't until like I had a really serious rattan injury that I really got serious about what I was doing with rapier.
Okay, that's cool.
But even really serious meant I was studying and drilling and practicing.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going out and trying to murder people.
Yeah. The learning portion, the growth portion.
Right.
The reason it was interesting in my particular journey. I went through Rapier, and I think in Mid Realm it's the Dragon's Tooth, like the
Yes.
one-time act of martial excellence.
Doing something stupid in front of the king.
Yeah, that. In Atlantis, it's the Shark's Tooth. And I have in my career received 0 Shark's Teeth for Rapier because I think I exceeded expectations my whole career. They're like, oh yeah, Bumi's running a line. That's what we expect of him. That's just what he does. Is a lot of the comments I would get, like the verbal out loud ones. And so it felt really good in Armor to like have the opportunity to exceed an expectation for a little while. And then I got knighted. I think those days are over, but I managed to get a couple of Shark's Teeth in that time period of like exceeding expectations.
Do you guys see a big difference in the melee tactics between the two? I will say this. I heard a story from last Pennsic Woods battle about one of our spear fighters, one of our heavy spear fighters, went in the woods battle and did a really good job. I'll just say that he's a top level spear fighter, and he did a really good job. And I thought to myself, and I'll be open about this. My first impression was, oh, those Rapier people must be terrible. They're so easy to stab with spears. And someone said, well, imagine if you were fighting an armored battle in Pennsic and they got rid of all the shields and all you had across from you were pole arms and spears. Is like, I'd probably stab a lot of people. So I find that maybe the lack of shields would make a real significant difference. The lack of shields, the lack of being able to charge and throw people around, which is something I don't like. I'm not built for charging or getting hit by charges. So for those of you that have done these melee battles on both sides, I mean, is there a big difference in strategy, tactics, command structure? Are there cultural differences? I imagine you run a little faster because you're not encumbered by all the armor, at least until you get up to the line where you're not allowed to run anymore.
I found a significant difference in the two. And I found Rapier melee pretty frustrating because despite whatever's drawn up, written up, talked about, it always seemed to devolve into two giant lines standing across from each other. And I found that rather tedious and uninteresting.
So I can add a little bit to that. What I've noticed when it devolves into two lines, it's usually after about 10 seconds. So there'll be a formation. They line up.
They have to get across the field first.
And then once the lines get together, or whatever formation meets, it's very rapid where it devolves into a line. But what I do find on the Rapier side is that when there are pockets and holes in the line, a lot of people don't take opportunity to work corners of the line as much. And it's usually more like friendly combat. I'm going to line up in front of you and we're going to fight across from each other, rather than trying to take every advantage that you have in front of you.
The lack of use of flanking in a game that has death from behind boggles my mind. Like, you actually get to flank and take advantage of flanking someone, and it just doesn't get used nearly enough.
So you think that's a cultural difference, not so much it's not for any sort of game mechanics reason, but just a cultural difference where they're just not thinking that way.
I'm just not sure.
I think DFBs are ineffective. Like, they're the way DFBs are set up right now in Rapier, it's less effective to like take the time to like alert you're dead, right? That action is less amplifying on the field than just showing up behind somebody and yelling, "Hey, I'm here. I'm your opponent," and just turning a lot more heads. Like, it is not I would rather, like, when I'm on the melee field, if I want to run a line, I'm going to turn the corner into the 180 and just attack my way down, because it doesn't take much to kill somebody, and if you it's very low effort to just point your point into just a line of humans comparatively to armored. Whereas, like in armored, I don't think you could run the same amount of people. You just can't. Like you have to hit hard enough, which means it takes longer to do each action
and gain engagement.
Exactly, yeah, and the engagement's different.
Because the rules set up a little different effectiveness.
I get why DFBs exist, but I think that they are something that the people who have done melee for a while in Rapier understand that that's the less effective option. They are much better off going to cause chaos just by turning some heads or finding a corner to hit. Or if they DFB the one general or one star player in that small segment of line and then leave. Like that, you don't actually want to run a line through DFBing. It's a slow and kind of a tedious action.
It took me a while to figure out what you were saying. DFB, dead from behind, right?
Sorry, jargon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like, what does he keep saying there?
Yeah, DFB. It is dead from behind, and it is an action where you have to take your blade and place it on the opponent's shoulder on the flat, and so that they can see your blade in front of them. And you say you have to give culturally, it's a give a verbal, my lord, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, and this to me is a like. I get why they do it. They want it to be safe. They don't want you to hit it with edge. They don't want you to thrust the back of somebody.
Yeah.
That's fine. I get but in function, it doesn't really work out very well because when you do it, you just get stabbed by the person next to you. You don't actually get to use the advantage of shanking a bunch of people in their back, right? Like that's what if you were actually in that position, you would do. You just like all of a sudden people would just see a sword kind of come through their front, and in rapid succession. It wouldn't be there wouldn't be this pause where you have to announce yourself there.
Yeah,
that just has to do with the rules and the parameters and safety more than anything else.
It's funny, based off something that Duke Edmund said about the people not really attacking the flanks. Two thoughts I had. One reminds me way back to when I started in 94 was my first Penzic. It's around 1994, 95. At the time, I remember some older fighters, probably, and by older I mean they're probably not even alive anymore. They were our age back then, and so there was, and usually from different kingdoms, but they had very much of a standard where, like in a melee, to gain someone's acknowledgement, you would sort of get their attention, they would turn, and then you would both sort of acknowledge, like, yes, we are engaged now, almost like a tournament, right? Like sort of a tournament culture. And I don't know. I kind of wonder if maybe there's some cultural things there where people are maybe used to more singles fighting, and that's just sort of the standard they're with. Or the other one I also know with sometimes with newer fighters, one of the things that we try to train out of them is that I truly believe there is a cultural dynamic, not an SCA culture, but like at least an American westernized culture where you always meet somebody in the front. So like if somebody's running up to the side and they can completely hit them, there's this natural instinct to kind of run and meet them in the front. And we particularly have that problem when we have two fighters going against one and they kind of get in each other's way. And I have to sometimes it takes a long time to explain, no, hit them in the back, step around them. Like you're allowed to do that. So I do that. I find that interesting, though, that you said that there's a cultural, or not necessarily cultural, but just you recognize that there's a difference in convention, I guess, in how people manage the melee combat. By the way, I don't participate in the Rapier scenarios, but I've noticed a lot of them seem to be they're doing like buildings and ships and stuff, like maybe more like street fighting kind of scenarios. Is that right? Am I remembering this correctly?
There's generally at least one battle that's a rather elaborate setup with a variety of obstacles, trees, buildings, bridges, causeways, what have you.
Do they ever have like the tapestry that you unravel and like you swing across to the other balcony and then you lower the chandelier and come down? Nothing like that.
I have not seen that yet. I believe that would take more engineering than the Penzic staff is prepared to give us.
Yeah, and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but growing up from watching movies, that was always the fun of the Rapier fighting was a lot of the swashbuckling and the sort of the acrobatics, I guess we'd see in the movies on like a pirate ship or inside of like I guess a great hall in a castle or something. So I got two computers going on here. Two different keyboards I keep typing on. I'm trying to pull up the different questions we have here.
Yeah. So one more thing, in the woods battle last summer, I totally brought my shield out, and I've got a 42-inch rapier, and I just went straight for the side with the spears, and I found the shield was very effective. And once you get past the tip, then you can pretty much go in and kill somebody.
Were you using your armored shield? Were you using like a strapped or a center grip? Or a...
I was using my strapped.
Okay. Your what would be your rattan strap typically?
This was a loner warboard.
Okay.
Not too giant, but bigger than about a little bit bigger than a typical strapped heater. Like
Okay. Yeah. So much larger than what you
20
normally see on rapier.
Probably, yeah, a little bit. 24 by like 32 or 34 or something like that.
Yeah. Armored shield. That's cool. Yeah. I don't think rapier fighters know how to deal with an armored shield like that size and shape. It is,
but a lot of the spear fighters, I think, were more crossovers. So a lot of
they should understand how to deal with it.
Also, they wouldn't have known how to deal with it because a rattan fighter wouldn't shoot at their shins.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's one of the things I would immediately do is just hit you in the shin. If I was
I didn't have any spear shots on below the knees.
Oh,
yeah.
I find that one of the most.
Bari, last year was the first year we'd had spears at the war, so it was a different learning curve for everybody.
Definitely.
How are those working out?
It's good to break up the monotony of the line.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it being in sort of like cordoned off sections where you could go have the spear fun if you wanted, but if you didn't want to be subjected to lots of dying if you didn't go out with a warboard, then you could play somewhere else. But it gave everybody a chance to do what they wanted to do. So,
okay, are they hitting pretty safely? Do you think they're not too hard or anything?
I didn't have reports of any excessive that resulted in anybody being removed, and we finished all the battles that we planned on having spear in.
That's right. Oh, and for anyone that doesn't know, I don't know if you said this in the podcast, but you were king last Penzig, right?
Right.
Yeah, king for the mid realm. The enemy, king of the enemies. You guys have any specific or different advice for people crossing over? Sorry, this was a bunch of fragments. This was a sentence fragment here. Sorry, I'm trying to read a question here. Do you have any specific or different advice for people crossing over, primarily for war melee only versus crossing over for primarily singles tournament or doing everything? Yeah, I guess that would be an interesting dynamic. So let's say if you're going to a big war like Gulf Wars or Penzig, is there a difference between crossing over? I mean, God, I guess there's a lot of tournaments, and then there's a lot of melees, and you kind of have to juggle all of that. I can't imagine doing everything.
So if you're going to do melee, I strongly urge you to make sure you understand the rules and not just read them, but make sure you're working with people that are melee knowledgeable, experienced melee fighters to show you the unwritten version of like, yeah, that the rules say this, but we don't do that because it's not cool. Or, yeah, we do this because they are very different. And if you walk out on the rattan melee and you strike somebody who doesn't see you from a 180, which is legal in Rapier, you're going to end up in some trouble. Someone's going to be yelling at you. Or if you try to DFB somebody in a rattan battle, it's going to be a little weird. People if you're used to Rapier melee, people are going to run into you in a rattan battle. If you're a rattan guy, you can't run into somebody when you're fighting. I mean, there's all the rules they're very different, and you still don't want to run afoul of them out of ignorance. Just make sure you understand what the rules and what the expectations are when you go into it, and you'll have fun.
Column charge in a Rapier line.
Jesus. They'll be barbecuing off cards for days.
Any other topics you guys want to bring up that we haven't covered so far?
Hmm. So, Edmund, what do you think about the timing and the and range control differences, the pace of the fight?
So you can, in Rattan, you can get away with puking energy on your opponent, so to speak. You can physically move in and dominate them, especially since most fighters are cutters. You can. It's easier to block a cut than a thrust, especially with the targeting zones we have and the equipment we have. So you can change ranges and generally pretty safely. In Rapier, you've got. I mean, Rapier is all about positioning and tempo. Bumi and I can fight, and he is 10 times faster than me. But if I'm in the right position, I can survive and maybe get a shot off on him. In Armored, it might be a different story because I know how to cut the angles. And yeah, he may be fast, and I can walk him around the list field for 30 minutes until he makes a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But I can close range a lot easier in that case. But when you're fighting Rapier, you've got your guard and your forte. That's all your defense right there. Well, you're offhand, but I mean that you don't have nearly as much surface area to protect yourself with, and what you're trying to block is much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to think your way through the fight more. I think it's a much more technical, much more precise. Activity. It's the difference between modern brain surgery and Civil War field hospitals.
I've noticed. I watched. I watched the Heroic Champions battle last Pennsic. I sat through the entire thing. So with that, I think I got to watch something like 20 or 25 Rapier duels, along with the Rattan duels. And so from the Rattan side, maybe there's some Rapier people that don't know the Rattan side. We typically have sword and shield, shields of various styles, but they're all generally sort of in the same ballpark. We've got center grip versus strapped heaters or strap shields, and then a single sword on the other hand. Single swords are usually about the same length, anywhere between like 32 and 40 inches. And then we've got pole arms or other great weapons, but usually pole arms, and then two sword, and then it's kind of popular last year. I think we had like 4 Madus, which is basically holding a stick in one hand that has a stab on either end and you can block with, and then a sword. So I'm familiar with those. And then can someone tell me about the different Rapier styles? Because I saw I remember Duke Dietrich had like little pavis or something like that out there in one hand, and someone else had like a big curved saber. I wasn't really familiar with the different styles. And so I guess what are the different styles, and then what constitutes this person's allowed to hold a second weapon, and these people are not allowed to do that for whatever the rules are. Like what is that in the SCA? I'm not really familiar with all the different Rapier styles. Whoever wants to grab that one.
So on the Rapier side, Rapier and dagger is to Rapier what sword and shield is to armored.
Okay.
It's the predominant style that most people fight. But unlike armored, single Rapier is also a very common choice. Most of the time you will see single sword and dagger. Occasionally you'll see buckler fighters, which is what you're talking about with His Highness Dietrich. Case is also allowed, which is 2 swords. And there's also 2-handed swords, long sword. And now we also have a further distinction in that there is Rapier, and then there's also cut and thrust, which allows the incorporation of percussive cuts, which standard Rapier does not allow.
So for cut and thrust, that would be a rule set, right? Like this particular tournament, we're doing cut and thrust versus this other tournament, we're not doing that.
Correct. And some of the fights were set up specifically for cut and thrust. And in fact, we had one fight that also allowed an experimental form, which was grappling.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which is also part of several of the historic manuals. Because I mean, as Bumi knows, doing jujitsu, you throw a couple punches and you're grabbing each other. You throw a couple sword shots and suddenly you're core, and you got to figure out how to deal with it from there.
Why would somebody use, again, my own ignorance here, I'm asking this question, why would somebody choose to use a sword and dagger when they could just use two swords? What, like, is one better than the other, or does one require a different skill set, or is there a preference thing?
For dueling purposes,
yes.
When you have two swords, right, if you're from the outset, it looks like, oh, the person with the two longer weapons has the advantage.
Right.
But what you lose is the ability to defend yourself. When you have two long blades, now you have ultimately built-in weaknesses. For instance, it is very hard to kind of cover the other side of your body because your swords are pointed forward. They don't have the ability to stand more upright and kind of move around as a shield would, like, right? Effectively like what a Madu does, right? That upright back and forth blocking. And I think that the reason sword and dagger is part of the meta is because it allows you to fight at both far and close ranges, right? If you get close with the dagger on a two-sword person, you win. They can't stab you. You're past their point, or points in that particular case. Whereas typically it seems sword and dagger has the least amount of obvious weaknesses or built-in kind of loopholes based on the weaknesses. That's the best word for that. Built on the weapon forms themselves.
Yeah, using a second rapier in your offhand. I mean, not a lot of people have the strength or put the time in to train that. Mm-hmm. So it is a difficult set. Plus, with both swords being long, they can get in each other's way very easily. Yep. And from the historic standpoint, there's not a lot of talk about two rapiers in the manuals. You get some talk of two swords in Bolognese. Very little, if any, when you get to the point of having rapiers, because you wouldn't walk around with two rapiers on your hip. Generally, those were generally some kind of like a professional bodyguard, a street sweeper, who would try to when his patron was being attacked by thugs trying to rob them, he would swing the two swords around like a madman to make the people stay back so his patron could run away. It's not a very logical style from a historical standpoint, and it is a difficult skill.
I'm going to add a little bit of an analogy. If you were to go out with buckler and sword in armored combat, and one of the opponents is going to have a 48-inch sword and the other one's going to have a 32-inch sword. If you can close, the 32-inch sword moves so much faster than the 48-inch. And with a dagger and a rapier blade, the dagger is so fast at picking up blocks and parrying the weapon, you can't move the rest of the 20-inch longer sword as fast as you can just move the dagger by itself. Mm-hmm. So I find it the finesse of how fast you can grab a weapon and push it offline really helpful.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm going to assume that you guys know what you're talking about. I certainly don't.
Strong assertion.
Yes. Hey, we're about an hour and a half into this, so I think we're sort of at the end of our show. So if maybe does each one of you want to wrap things up real quickly? We can go to Duke Edmund if you have any final thoughts there.
Have fun with swords. Whichever way you go, try the other side. Just have fun with it. Now we get to hate our friends with swords. It's the best club in the world, man.
All right, Earl Louis.
Embrace the learning and try something else. I really love being on that front end learning curve. I enjoy it. So come give it a try.
Sir Bumi.
For those who have any sort of intimidation about the other group, know that both groups are just made of humans who also want to have friends and hit each other with swords. And it is okay to reach out and make friends out of your immediate circle. And it's, in fact, I would say good to have those experiences because we all play a very niche hobby as it is. And so those even smaller circles are really ultimately, I think, a detriment to us being a society as a whole.
All right. Okay, well, I don't have much to add here. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I don't think we have a show solidified yet, but I do think we're going to have some. I'm pushing for something in 2 weeks. So stay tuned. We'll get our press out pretty soon. I think we always have something interesting here. So with that, good evening and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
it.
Thank you.